Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. We're continuing our discussion with Howie Klein, who joins us from Los Angeles. Howie is a former music producer and record label executive. He was president of Reprise Records from '89 to 2001. He's a progressive activist noted for his stance against censorship and his advocacy of free speech protection. He's now an adjunct professor at McGill University. He serves on the board of People for the American Way and blogs under the nom de guerre, Down with Tyranny. Thanks for joining us again, Howie.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so what's the game theory of this? So let's assume that the polls are more or less right, even though in the last conversation you didn't think much of the polls, but let's assume the Democrats control the House. It's going to create two things. One, the question is, what can they do? What should they do if they control the House, given the Senate is in all likelihood going to be Republican, and they've got President Trump? And two, there's one would think, going to be a front of struggle within the Democratic Party. If a lot of these progressives that are running get elected, they're running on agendas that are not quite the same as the agenda of the corporate Dems, certainly the Chuck Schumers of this world, on a whole host of questions, both domestic and foreign policy. So what do you think they should do, and how do you see this fight in the Democratic Party unfolding?
All right, so let's do the internal Democratic Party situation first. And that's mostly bad news. So because the DCCC is controlled by the Republican wing of the Democratic Party, utterly and totally controlled by it, the candidates that they recruited to the districts that they're most likely to win, which are also the candidates where they spent incredible millions of dollars, like $2 and $3 and $4 million in each race. Those are the races that are all New Dems and Blue Dogs. So they are not, I think there are maybe two exceptions, they're not supporting progressives. Jared Golden up in Maine is a progressive that they gave some money to, and there maybe one. Katie Porter here in California because Elizabeth Warren forced them to. They spent some money on her, but generally speaking, all of the money, all of the big money, is going to New Dems and Blue Dogs. So the New Dems and the Blue Dogs are Wall Street oriented, and they are the conservative Democrats. They're considered the Republican wing of the Democratic Party. Of all, just say that we win 60 seats. It's very optimistic. We win 60 seats. 40 of them will be all terrible, horrible Democrats. They'll be very conservative. I mean, let me just give you an example, one that I can't stop thinking about. We're in Virginia. So one of the arch villains of the Republican Party in Congress is a guy named Dave Bratt. You probably remember him because he beat Eric Cantor, and it was a big deal. You know, it's a big sprawling district that goes almost from the North Carolina border up to the D.C. Suburbs. I mean, it's an incredibly insane district, the fifth. And he's terrible. You're not going to find many Republicans worse than him, Dave Bratt. So the DCCC recruits this woman. I think she was a CIA spy or something like that. So right away, you have to be a little bit worried about what we're getting here. And they recruited her to run, and it turns out the last ad that I saw, maybe another ad came out since then, but I think this was her closing ad, could have been written by Trump. That's how bad it was. She's using every possible way to denigrate immigrants. And saying how she will protect the country from criminals and terrorists. I mean, does that sound like a Democrat? That's who we have. That's who we have as our candidate.
That sounds like Chuck Schumer.
Okay, well, look, I went to high school with Chuck Schumer. You don't have to tell me anything bad about Chuck Schumer that I don't already know. But she's running in the House. I mean, you want to talk about Chuck Schumer? Chuck Schumer found the worst Democrat in the entire House, Kyrsten Sinema. When I say worst, I know her for other things, but she is the worst in terms of her voting record. She has the worst voting record. She votes the most frequently against progressive legislation than any Democrat in the House. She is the chairwoman of the Blue Dogs. She's just terrible. Who does Chuck Schumer pick to be the Democratic nominee for the absolutely crucial Arizona Senate seat? He found the worst possible person, Kyrsten Sinema. She was his pick. She's the candidate.
Okay,
And if
Howie.
we don't win that seat, we're not going to win the Senate.
Howie, tell me what if the Democrats control the House, what should they do? Like, what are the progressive candidates going to fight for? And what is possible when you don't control the presidency, you don't control the Senate? What can they do over this next 2 years? Because it's all about what happens in 2020. So how do they use the House, because it's all about 2020?
Right. So can and should are two different things. Nobody can possibly expect any really good legislation to come out of the House. It's not going to happen. I mean, they could pass it just to show people what they'd like to do in 2020, but it's not going to go in. It's not going to pass the Senate. It's not going to get signed by Trump. So what they can do are and everyone's been talking about this, is real solid investigations, and that's what they're going to do. They'll be able to investigate the things that the Republican-controlled House didn't do. And that is why people are excited about voting for them, because they will put the Trump regime under some sort of a check. And there's not much else that they can do. There will be things like where they will have a role, where Trump can't move forward on the budget without them. So they'll be able to, they'll have to compromise. Trump will have to compromise, and the Democrats will have to compromise. And frankly, the American people like that. They think that's the best way to have government anyway. I don't agree, but that is what history tells us.
They can also insist whether it will help or not on the issue of who has the power to go to war. But it's hard to know whether the Chuck Schumers of this world will help on that fight.
Right, but we're talking about the House.
I'm talking about the House.
You can't expect much from Chuck Schumer on that kind of thing. But in the House, what you can expect is there will be people like Ro Khanna and Ted Lieu who will be making a lot of noise, and they'll be listened to now about the U.S. involvement in, for example, Yemen. Both of those members of Congress have introduced legislation to stop the American involvement in Yemen. So there'll be lots more of that type of thing happening.
And does the House have the power to defund that, or does it requires the Senate and the president?
100% requires the Senate and the president. Now, if we had a veto-proof majority, they could go over the president's head, but we're not anywhere close. I mean, in the Senate, we need a veto-proof majority in both houses, but we don't have anywhere near that. I mean, that's not a reality. So all they can do is make a lot of noise about it, which can then be part of the campaign in 2020. But there are things where the compromise will happen, and in some cases, not many, but in some cases, it'll be good things, and like the infrastructure bill. Both Trump and the Democrats are going to want an infrastructure bill, and the Democratic infrastructure bill would be much different from the Republican infrastructure bill. But now they'll have to work together, and the Democrats will get some good things, and the Republicans will get some of the terrible things they want. But that's going to be one of the places where you'll see some interesting battles going on, and people playing their political games. Budget also same sort of situation with the budget, and Trump will be playing chicken. I'll shut the government down, and the Democrats will do whatever they do about that, whether they give in to him or they decide to fight him and let the people decide who shut the government down. I mean, there's going to be a lot of game playing, and like you said in the question, it's going to all be leading to the 2020 elections. Who's going to control the Senate? Who's going to control the presidency?
So what kind of investigations, what kind of inquiries? Roger Stone was on TV on Fox the other day, I think it was Fox, but saying that he thinks the first thing that's going to happen or very soon is impeachment hearings, and there's some support for that in the Democratic Party and some opposition to it.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of support for it, and there's a lot of opposition to it, and the leadership does not want it, and it's not. I don't see it happening, and I think Roger Stone is just saying that the same way that a lot of Trump outlets are saying it, as a way to scare people. There's certainly not going to be enough people to find him guilty in the Senate. So even if the House impeaches him, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. But there are a lot of people who want to see him impeached anyway, since he deserves to be impeached. He has earned impeachment. Impeach him.
Well, I guess the point of the process would be to bring to light, as everyone heads towards 2020, the more criminal side of that's alleged with Trump in terms of not so much the election interference, but the various things he's been involved with not just Russian oligarchs, but various things all around the world.
There's no question that all of this stuff is going to be investigated. There's absolutely even Pelosi acknowledges that in a big way. Whether that's going to be under the aegis of impeachment or not is another thing. I suspect what they're going to do is everything that would be called an impeachment investigation is going to be divided up among every single committee, and that's what they're going to spend a lot of their time on. So it won't. So in other words, even if they don't formally try to have an impeachment of him in the Judiciary Committee, and there are members of the Judiciary Committee that are going to want that. I mean, you've got Ted Lieu on that committee, you've got Pramila Jayapal on that committee, you've got Jamie Raskin is on that committee. So we're talking about three of the most brilliant judicial minds in the country, and all three of them would like to impeach Trump. So there's going to definitely be some push in that direction. And what's going to really matter is, if Nancy, Pelosi, who's not going to be in favor of this, if she, how far she lets it go. I don't think it'll go all the way, but she may let it go to some extent. My guess is that it's going to go to the extent, like I said earlier, where it'll be parsed out to lots and lots of committees, and each committee will investigate the criminality of the Trump regime based on its own turf. I was just writing before you and I got on the phone about Trump's attacks on Maxine Waters. People just assume that because Trump hates black people and because Trump hates women or successful black people and successful women, because he can't stand that's why he's attacking Maxine. But he is. I mean, yes, that's part of it. But there's another part of it. If the Democrats win the House, and Trump is kind of acknowledging that they're going to, she's going to be the head of the House Banking Committee. They don't call it that anymore. The House Financial Services Committee. That's the newer name. And the Trump administration has completely dropped the ball on any kind of supervision over the banking industry, and Wall Street is being allowed to run free, and she's going to stop that in 1 second flat. And what Trump is doing right now by denigrating her so badly and calling her a low IQ individual and saying these horrible things about her is not just because he hates women and hates blacks so much. It's also because he's setting up a situation where in the future, when he's going to be confronting her over Wall Street, he's already laid some kind of a base, at least for his own followers, that she's not worthy of having an opinion that can be respected.
And I hope there's more of that in terms of investigating into the substance of his policies, and not all about his criminality. I'm not saying the criminality or alleged criminality isn't worth looking at, but the substance of what's been going on during the course of this administration has just been drowned out by Russiagate and all the other kinds of, worrying about what he tweets every night.
Yeah, but a lot of that is tied together. His criminality and his policies go hand in hand. I mean, I hate to go back to Maxine again, but how is she going to differentiate between the literally kleptocratic policies that he's pursuing in regard to Wall Street and his own purse? I mean, there's almost no way to do that, and it's going to be the same thing. I mean, when the Foreign Relations Committee starts investigating the things that he's doing, they're all tied to, almost all of them are tied to things that benefit him and his business. So I mean, even if they just start out on policy, they're going to wind up at least partially with criminality. No matter, or if they start out with criminality, they're going to wind up in policy. It's all so enmeshed with each other.
Now, I think the one foreign policy question there could be a real split on in the Democratic Party is the attitude towards Iran. I mean, Chuck Schumer never liked the nuclear agreement that Obama negotiated. Chuck Schumer was more in the Trump camp. But most of the party supported the agreement. And given what this administration's foreign policy is, which is all about isolating, trying to find a way to have regime change in Iran, allying with the worst of the Saudis and so on. How do you see this split evolving?
There's a chance that Chuck Schumer is going to be the majority leader of the Senate, and that's going to make a big difference. But if we're going on the assumption that we're going to win the House and not the Senate, Chuck Schumer's role in this stuff is going to be not as strong. So then, but you could pretty much say the same thing about the Democratic House leadership. A lot of them are also, they're not as bad as Chuck Schumer, but there is, let's put it like this, there is definitely a split over Iran. So what's going to happen with Iran, there are people who are feel very, very strongly in both directions about it, and it's going to be a real tough issue. Anything that involves Israel, as soon as Israel comes into anything, it's one of the third rails of American politics because of the financial power of Jewish contributors, and it makes it really difficult for people who you might not expect that from. So who knows? My guess is that they'll try to tiptoe around Iran as much as possible.
And they may try to tiptoe around it, but it seems to me, given who the Trump administration is, John Bolton, and what their policy from day one has been, I don't know there's been anything more important to them than regime change in Iran or destabilizing.
Well, if they really go for actual regime change that involves war, then it's a different ballgame. Then forget. There's no tiptoeing around that. Then there's I don't see other than a few people like Chuck Schumer, I don't see anybody not opposing war or any kind of a fighting situation, period. While Trump is president, we cannot be having any kind of fighting. Just can't happen.
All right, thanks for joining us, Howie.
Okay, thanks. My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.